Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Adapt and Scale in Retail to Deliver Outstanding Customer Experiences. My name is Dan Berthume, and I'm Senior Technology Editor of Chain Store Age, and I will be your moderator today. We'll get started in a few moments. While we wait for some more people to join us, I just need to cover a few housekeeping items. We try to make these webinars as interactive as possible, so please feel free to use the Q&A function to ask questions throughout the hour. You will find that on the left side of your screen down below the presenter headshots. Our sponsor will follow up by email after the session concludes. Now, you can also use this section down here on the left if you have any technical questions about the webinar itself, and you will get a direct reply from Lindsay, our very capable webinar producer. We also encourage you to provide any other feedback that you might have using this feature. Finally, if you'd like to review this webinar later on or share it with your colleagues, a replay will be available on the Chain Store Age site later today and will remain available for several months. Okay, that does it for the housekeeping. Let's get on with the webinar. We have a lively conversation with three first-rate expert speakers today, ready to provide you with insight into how retailers can respond to consumer and industry trends by implementing innovations that offer speed, agility, convenience, and security for customer interactions, all aimed at attracting and retaining loyal customers. The speakers will also highlight real use cases showcasing how retailers are deploying edge technology to provide experiences like contactless checkout, real-time promotions, advanced inventory management, and more. So our first speaker is Bryn Norton, Vice President, Platform Adoption of Lumen, who's also sponsoring today's webinar. Bryn joined Lumen in 2008 and oversees Lumen's technical strategist and platform adoption practices, which are groups of technology consultants focused on adding value to the customer experience and bringing industry expertise to bear. These teams develop and deliver solutions for a range of customers, from national infrastructure organizations through to global enterprises, driving the quality and assurance required to help meet today's business challenges. Rob Kane is a partner in the Minneapolis office of McKinsey, with more than 15 years leading or advising executives on technology. He has primarily served clients in the consumer, retail, and travel services industry, and has served leading institutions on topics of ERP program design and assurance, technology strategy, functional effectiveness and efficiency, and digital operating models. And Steve Rowan is a managing partner at Retail Systems Research, an industry market intelligence firm. He focuses on areas of emerging impact on the retail industry and also provides insights into merchandising and workforce management solutions and runs RSR's consumer research. Prior to his work as an analyst, Steve served as senior editor for multiple retail publications, including Extended Retail Industry Journal, Top of the Net, and Retail Systems Alert Monthly, where he interviewed retail executives for in-depth case studies of their challenges and opportunities. So let's get into the conversation. Bryn, how about you start us off with your take on how retail has changed forever in the past few years in terms of customer expectations, and what does optimized, successful retail look like?
Thanks, Dan. It's interesting, that question. It comes up a lot, as you can imagine. We spend a lot of time speaking with retailers across North America. And when I think about it, I kind of go back to myself. I am a consumer. I consume stuff. And I think about how my expectation has shifted around retail as a whole. So as you can tell, obviously not a native American. I am a Brit. I came here. I planned beautifully. I arrived 6 months before the pandemic. So I had 6 months of America. Then I was locked in a room. So great timing. Never used me as an orchestrator of an event, put it that way. But it's really interesting when I came here. So, I back in the UK, I was used to Tesco's, Waitrose, those types of stores. Personally, I'm just really don't like consumer goods shopping. I'm just a sort of a typical British bloke, and I try to avoid that at all costs. So I was used to digital interactions. I was used to shopping online. I had a cadence. I had an expectation. When I came to the US, I moved to Denver. I was genuinely really surprised about the lack of options that I had. The online shopping it felt still emergent. If I also think about banking, which I just want to pivot to quickly, I got issued a checkbook. I hadn't seen a checkbook in 10 years. I didn't know what this thing was. I mean, I genuinely can't remember before coming to this writing a check. So my digital experience here was really quite the polar opposite to what I had in the UK. You know, and when obviously the pandemic happened and organizations had to make that rapid pivot. And I think to where my expectation, my bar is now, just in a very 2-year period, has rapidly accelerated. You know, I now have 4 or 5 different institutions where I can shop goods, and they're delivered in under an hour now. I mean, the bar was 2, and it keeps knocking down. I mean, there is an app that I use at the moment where I ran out of some baking goods last night. Long story, still in trouble with Mrs. Norton. But I got the stuff delivered within 35 minutes. You know, so that expectation has finally shifted. So, you know, that's just me. That's just a quirky Brit. But I think that is a reality for a lot of consumers that I'm seeing out there right now. That sort of digital interaction, that need of an institution has really shifted. And we're beginning to see that in the data as well, in the way that people are using retail units now. They're not necessarily going there to consume stuff, but actually getting there to be advised, to learn. I think there's some really good examples and really some flagships out there that have really leaned into that methodology. So, Dan, as I think about that acceleration and change, but those are the things that come top of mind. And I think that expectation is going to continue. And we're going to see a greater drive towards that sort of omni-channel experience where the store becomes part of that motion and part of that drive, if that makes sense, sir.
Oh, absolutely. So maybe, so Rob and Steve, we could also open up the conversation to you. In addition to maybe giving your thoughts on what Bryn said, what have you seen in working with your clients in terms of what are their priorities in creating a new customer experience through technology? And what opportunities do you see post-pandemic as customers are returning to the physical stores?
So, Steve, maybe I'll go first, and you
Sure,
can check in. So, Bryn, what you've experienced coming to the U.S. and being a consumer over here is certainly supported by the analysis and data that we have looked at during the same time period. It is estimated that retailers have accelerated their investment in technology to sort of meet the needs that you've described by something like 10 years. So, and think of 10 years of investment and acceleration in technology and in capabilities over the course of, call it 24 to 36 months of the pandemic. So what you've experienced is certainly borne out in the data when you look at sort of the investment model for retailers. Global retail is estimated around an $11 trillion global industry. Historically, they've spent somewhere around 1.5% of those revenues on technology in a sustaining model on a year-over-year basis. We've seen that accelerate north of 2%. So it doesn't sound like a lot in absolute terms, but a 30% increase from 1.5% to 2% against an $11 trillion revenue number is a massive investment. So everything that you've experienced as a retailer, we've seen in working directly with our clients as they're trying to build out those capabilities, as you've described, to extend your omni-channel experience into physical retail, to make it a seamless, personalized, harmonized experience for you as a consumer. Consider it, you're welcome home from the colonists, Bryn. That we were able to provide that for you.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in for a second too. So, I mean, it's interesting, Bryn, that you think of your story as anecdotal. In essence, it summarizes the experience of being a consumer post-pandemic for all of us. It's interesting. Our job, I don't know how many people are familiar with RSR and what we do, but very briefly, we're all former retailers and we conduct research around retail and only retail every year. And every year we do a store report, and every year we do a workforce report, and every year we do an e-commerce report. And we've been doing it for 15 years. And probably the hardest part of our job is, as former retailers, we have such an unbelievable amount of empathy for how difficult it is to modernize and keep up with consumers as they become more technologically savvy, as they have more power in their pocket, and all the things that we all know, right? We all know that the shopping experience the balance is off, right? As consumers, we have so much more power, so much more knowledge, and so much more demand than is ever going to be satisfied by the average retailer. Luxury has its own market, but by and large, the most difficult part of our job is writing these reports year in and year out and being prescriptive without getting a little frustrated, without saying, hey, snap out of it, to quote the Moonstruck movie, right? Like, the balance is off. Amazon is eating everyone's lunch. You understand that the margins are very small, but the previous way of thinking of, well, we'll invest in that later, whatever that is. Maybe it's paying employees a living wage. Maybe it's investing in a mobile site that's actually easy to navigate. Maybe it's in arming your store consumers with the technology they need to keep up with consumers who walk in the door that are much more educated. Whatever that is, far too large a swath of retailers have thought, we'll deal with that later. And what the pandemic did was it said, later is not an option, right? All of a sudden, there is no option. If you want to survive, you have to now take seriously all these things that you've been so happy to put on the back burner for so long. And again, our job is to be empathetic and say, we get it. We understand there's not a lot of money to go around. There's a lot of priorities, but it's not getting any easier. It's not like supply chain shortages are going to all of a sudden magically go away. It's not like consumers are automatically magically going to become less demanding. It's not like inflation, all the things that are compounding at one particular time. Change is inevitable. And so the retailers who are able to recognize that the accelerant has long been here, and since 2008, when the stock market was ripping, everyone was like, well, we're happy to keep our margins and pass along the savings to our shareholders rather than reinvest in our businesses. That's just not a viable opportunity anymore. So, Bryn, your experience it's perfect because it's this sort of individual lens into a much larger issue, and to experience it as a quote unquote outsider to now be here is pretty much perfect.
Yeah, I do have this conversation quite a lot, and that 2-year gap from arriving here, I personally find a real stark contrast. And then when I look forward about how buying behaviors are changing, and I think about how certain consumer groups have shifted as part of that, Steve and Rob, so will I pay an extra 2% to have that item today? Will I pay an extra 5% to have it tomorrow? And that's affecting how personally I consume goods. But when I speak to some of my customers, they're trying to think about how do I get that more instantaneous fulfillment? So that's one bucket. The other one where I've seen a real pivot, and I'll be interested to discuss this with you guys, is direct to consumer. So I think about so I'm pivoting away from retail for a second, but I look after multiple verticals across the whole of North America. There's many manufacturers now that are trying to solve for this as well. As part of that sort of that shift in buying trends. I think a really good example is Nike. I got one of these token gift cards from my wife. Subtle hint: go and buy some running shoes. It was one of those scenarios. Went on to the Nike website, was able to customize that running shoe, and it was delivered. I think it was a week from that direct to consumer. I'm seeing an increase in that relationship as well, which is making manufacturers think differently about how do they hold inventory, how do they manage inventory as part of that, and how, whereas before they may have had some sort of digital presence that had some static content which is based around, manuals, user guides, it now needs to open up and welcome direct consumers into that world. And that's a trend that have also seen grow rapidly over the last 2 years. I don't know if you guys have seen a similar sort of piece from your lens.
100%.
Yeah. So yes to both. I think Amazon, certainly to your first point, Bryn, has successfully proved or at least tested the models of elasticity as it related to sort of price sensitivity for real-time fulfillment, right? Anybody that's an Amazon Prime member has basically said, yes, I'm willing to pay a premium for the sort of fulfillment cycles that you have demonstrated. And in many ways, the infrastructure that they build out to be able to keep that promise is one of the real factors that are pressurizing both retailers, as we've talked about, and consumer goods companies. So, I don't know if anybody has tested it to the ultimate limit. Would you pay $100 to get a 2-liter Coke delivered in 5 minutes? Probably not, right?
Yeah.
But they have proven some of those pricing models for elasticity for real-time fulfillment. So I think that is a real consideration for retailers and consumer goods companies alike. And again, certain categories are obviously different dynamics, as Steve has mentioned. On the direct-to-consumer side, absolutely, right? I mean, I think in COVID was obviously an anomaly in that it was an existential threat to that their primary brick and mortar channel was suddenly closed or largely closed. And again, to Steve's point, in certain categories, no idea exactly when and how that would reopen, right? So we and our clients, we saw almost a mad rush to build direct-to-consumer capabilities. I mean, just look at the valuation of a company like Shopify, right? So Shopify as the engine to a lot of rapid build out of direct-to-consumer. Shopify's market cap at one point was larger than SAP's. And SAP is the de facto ERP across retail and consumer to a large extent. And so it's fascinating to see the dynamic for direct-to-consumer play out. And I think, to your point, Bryn, I don't think there's any end in sight in terms of the capability building and sort of the capability add that we should expect to see with direct-to-consumer. What I do think is interesting is I do think there'll be more and more of a tie-in, and we'll talk a little bit about it later, I think, more and more of a tie-in with sort of retail edge and what retailers need to build, right? So the ability to connect between my omni-channel or direct-to-consumer experience with a consumer good, and when I walk into my favorite retailer, to have some level of seamless continuity, whether that's loyalty, personalization, or otherwise, for direct-to-consumer, I think is not only emerging, but likely a sustained trend. Steve, I don't know if you hear the same thing.
I know at some point, I know we have slides that we're going to want to get into here, but I just want to add one point before, if we are making that shift at some point. It's funny, we're in full user group conference season. Rob, I'm sure you're out on the road. Dan probably as well. Bryn, it's just so strange, right? All these things that were part of our lives before that went away for 18 months, 24 months, whatever it was, that are back in full force. And in the last 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks, I've been to 5 or 6 user conferences. And what I think is worth echoing is when it relates to direct to consumer, when it relates to using stores that were closed, that were closed by mandate as shipping centers, as node of the supply chain to ship direct to consumers. I don't think that retailers get enough credit for what they did there. We're talking about really difficult things that would have taken, we were really lucky. Right before the pandemic, literally a month before the pandemic, we conducted a survey about buy online, pick up in store. And the general takeaway at that point, regardless of retailers, regardless of what they sold, and regardless of what their sales performance was it'll be nice to have someday. A month later, the world shut down. And we got to see what happens when people who had no intention of working and playing well together, supply chain people working with merchandising people work with marketing people, all of a sudden these people were required to be thrown into rooms and say, if we want to get through this thing, we need to put the siloed and this is my way of doing things, way of behavior aside, and work together collaboratively. And I don't think there's enough credit given for how quickly so many retailers, surprisingly average retailers, were able to put together ways to deliver to consumers in meaningful and fast and convenient ways at the drop of a dime, at the drop of a hat. Really.
Totally agree, Steve. I think people underestimate the complexity of the problem. I mean, if you take a real retailer, for example, someone like Target, Target in the US pre-pandemic had something like 50 fulfillment centers around the world located at the main intersections of highways and rail, right, to fulfill stores. And Target had to shift to figuring out how to basically replenish from those 50 macro centers at sort of, truck and rail intersections to fulfill from 1,950 stores is where I think they're at. Walmart had to do the same thing with 4,800 stores, right? So just building the technology and the capability and the physical infrastructure, converting backroom storage into fulfillment centers. I mean, it was heroic. I fully agree with that.
And there were small mall-based brands. I'm not going to name names here, but I saw a retailer that I never would have dreamt could have been, seen as cutting edge. Had to do the same thing. and was able to take seasonal merchandise that otherwise would have, rotted, or however you want to, phrase it, otherwise would have become, passé, and was able to not only just get that inventory out the door from their stores that had gone dark, but was actually able to create enough generation that when stores could reopen again, they didn't have the inventory to fulfill orders. I mean, there were some pretty creative and difficult things that were done in that short period of time. And what I really hope is that the momentum is not lost. What I really hope is that spirit of innovation and, okay, the momentum has started. We're going to start paying attention to what consumers want. We're not just going to rest on our laurels and say we at least survived that, because who knows what the next thing is, right?
It's really interesting because, again, when I first came over to the US, I sat down with a couple of big retailers and they were wrestling with, what does the store of the future look like for me? Right? And there was this kind of undertone narrative of brick and mortar is dead. To your point, Steve, there's this big hyperscaler out there consuming market share. And then we start looking at some of the data about what actually happened, what actually occurred. And some of the stuff we can share after this with the group, but, that concept of Boris, buy and return. We're seeing somewhere
click and collect, as it were, in other parts of the world.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. But we saw somewhere around about a 70% adoption of that. To your point, I think the other thing that was really interesting, and I remember this meeting vividly. I won't mention the brand, but they're like millennials. They won't engage with the store.
Right.
And actually, we've seen the complete opposite of that. And I think that goes back to how individuals and different individuals are using physical infrastructure for now as part of that buying journey. There's different trends, and again, I'm just looking at some data points I've got here. It's whatever we want to create out of this, there is a definite trend that says, look, people are buying less from a physical store. So the data that I've seen recently says, somewhere between 6 and 7%. I've got some data from US and Germany and the UK, and it's bunched around that. Okay, that's fine. And if you just skim past the data, what you take away from it is stores are in decline. But what in my opinion, a lot of people are missing is the other things that people are using stores for. Right. Now, at the same time, maybe I'm not going to that store to make that transaction now. What actually I'm doing is to get some sort of advice. So the flip side to that is that utilization. We're seeing somewhere between a 10 and 12% increase of using that store as some sort of educational hub or some sort of customer experience. So the really innovative retailers are leaning into that hard. There's a well-known, I can't mention the name, there's a well-known paint person. Let's call them paint person. So I'm not sure. I don't want to give too much away. But we've been working with to help them look at creating an underlying infrastructure to run more of a consultative experience. So when you're coming in to get your paint, being able to maybe visually see what that looks like in your room, to get that sort of consultative engagement, and then integrating that physical store environment to a buying journey. So when you're no longer thinking about someone coming to make a physical transaction, i.e. Bryn or Rob or Steve's coming into a shop to give $20 and leave with something, they're looking at a buying journey that may start on a website, that may start on a mobile app, that may start in the store, but they're tracking that individual all the way through that journey. Right. And where I'm seeing retailers lean into that, they're having a lot of success. And I think, to me, Dan, to your initial question, that's one of the big trends that I'm seeing on a lot of that. Just put curious.
I mean, think about just the assumption behind that. Right? If you're painting a room, there's probably a reason for that, right? There's probably something happening in life. Maybe your kids moved out and gone to college. Maybe you're welcoming a little one. Maybe your elderly mother's moving in with you. Maybe your wife just got tired of looking at white walls, like in our case, Rob. Whatever it might be, there's probably a life event tied behind it. And the more information you can glean from that, the more interesting the experience becomes. So completely agree, Rob. I mean, stores are not places to go. And it used to be you went to a store with no idea of what was inside it. You look at the shelf and say, oh my God, they have 10 of these. I have to have this. It's just not what happens anymore. No. Right? So Dan, I see you jumping in.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, Steve. I didn't mean to cut you off, but this has been a great conversation. However, I think we're at a time where we'd like to actually ask our audience their thoughts. So let's get a quick poll of the room about what phase of transformation might be at today. So what is the status of your retail business's digital transformation? Has it been implemented? Are you currently planning? are you investigating, or do you have no interest?
Maybe I'm daft, but I don't see what the results are yet. So somebody's gonna have to read them out.
Oh, they're actually no. The results have actually come in.
Okay. So
we're going to wait just a moment for the results to finish coming in, or to give people a little more time to send in their answers. We're certainly very interested in seeing these responses. And we'll wait another minute or so and just at least get a general read of the room here.
So
okay, so it looks like the results are in. And we have, looks like 10% of the audience have implemented their digital transformation. Another 50% are in the planning phase. 40%, 40% are investigating. And I think in a promising sign, nobody said they have no interest. So it looks like clearly our audience is all aware at least there's a need, a potential need for digital transformation.
I'd have been very surprised, Dan.
Yeah. But it's better to ask that question and get it confirmed than always kind of wonder, does somebody have no interest and not know what to say?
Right. No interest in being successful today. You can take me off your list.
Right. So with that, I'm actually, we're going to move the conversation forward. I'm going to direct my next question to Rob. And that is, retailers can get lost or overwhelmed at the thought of competing with the retail giants and online megastores that have huge tech budgets and infrastructure. So Rob, maybe you could talk about some of the most prevalent use cases that McKinsey has identified that are within reach for the average retailer.
Yeah, sure, Dan. And I think, implied in that statement, or maybe if you unpack it a little bit, I do believe that the trends in retail in some way are a great equalizer. I'd love for Steve to talk about it. It's possible for a relatively small retailer or born online retailer consumer brand to project a real presence, sort of outswing their weight a little bit online and digital. In some ways, it's a great equalizer. So I think it's sort of a unique perspective to take when you look at it. We've identified, Dan, to answer your question specifically, we've identified about 40 digital use cases across retail that are being demonstrated at scale, right? So at scale means sort of beyond a pilot stage, right? And we were working with Lumen, actually, with Bryn's team. We said, there are a couple of categories that emerge that are sort of most relevant in the context of cloud and edge, and certainly in terms of bringing compute and storage capabilities to the store. Specifically, you're seeing sort of contactless checkout emerge. For anybody that's gone to sort of an Amazon Go store, the ability to have a complete in-store shopping journey that is not sort of interacting with either a store associate or a cashier. Obviously the mobile phone or mobile device is ubiquitous. I think it's underestimated the amount of technology that's required to make that happen. It's not simply sort of mobile payments and some sort of near field wireless. The ability to do sort of significant sort of visual observation through camera vision and machine learning to sort of understand whether or not something has been put into a cart or, to Bryn's point, put back on the shelf. So contactless checkout is probably growing among the fastest that we have certainly observed. Again, consistent with Bryn's experience stateside, real-time promotions are exploding. So real-time promotions, imagine Bryn goes to his favorite shop and he's looking for hobnobs, of course, but he's likely to be disappointed in the US. So he may have to go hunting for double stuffed Oreos or something like that. But as he stands aghast in the biscuit aisle looking for hobnobs, he's known to the retailer for walking in. He's interacted on their site. He's created a profile. He's known to them. he buys online from them, he has some loyalty program to them, that retailer will have the intelligence to know, hey, he's standing in front of a display, and I'm going to send Bryn a coupon to soften the blow that he has to buy Chips Ahoy instead of Hobnobs this time, and we're going to give him a real-time buy one, get one free, or a coupon or some other thing to sort of incentivize his behavior in the physical retail store. Again, the amount of intelligence required between geolocation, visual inspection, the ability to sort of validate his identity, the ability to sort of send an approved promotion that's been agreed upon in terms of a contract with that retail, requires real intelligence and real capability to do that. The third one that I would note that's consistent with that, and you're seeing this more and more across quick serve. I don't know if there's any, food service or food and beverage retailers on the call, but the prevalence of digital signage. So not only sort of individual digital signage that's actually flashing at Bryn, to go buy this and not that, and to sort of interact on a personal level, but the ability to update pricing real time on an intelligent shelf with digital pricing, the ability to update a display at an end cap, or the ability to update sort of a shopping journey throughout the store with real-time digital signage. Again, sounds simple, but the ability to manage all of that content in the back end, all of those pricing tables, all of that assortment table, and actually push that intelligence to the edge real time as Bryn shops for biscuits is quite an undertaking. So there are 3 or 4 dozen digital use cases that are emerging, Dan, and those I would say have come to the forefront in our research that we did alongside with Lumen for sure.
Okay, great. So let's open this up. Bryn and Steve, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on some or any or all of the points
Sure.
That Rob has made in those use cases.
Sure, I'll try to do it quickly. I mean, Rob said so much there. There were so many points that I think we're all kind of in violent agreement here, which is great. But one of the earliest things that Rob talked about was the smaller retailers having some kind of competitive advantage here to punch outside their weight class. And when we conduct our surveys, we've been doing it, as I said, for 15 years. And one of the things that I don't want to say was a foregone conclusion, but we could almost rely on every time, is that when we asked questions around innovation, the better a retailer's sales performance, the more likely they were to be ahead, right? We talk about retail. If you've ever read our report, we talk about retail winners. Retail winners win not because they do the same things differently. They win because they do completely different things. They look at problems differently and they approach them differently, and they align their internal organizations to handle those differently. And somewhere around probably 4 or 5 years ago, we just started to find a new trend emerging, which is that when we asked questions around innovation specific to technology, whether it's in the store, online, wherever it might be within the context of that particular conversation, that scope of that research, the smallest retailers and the largest retailers tracked behaviorally together. So you had these people that had the might of, extensive R&D departments to go out and try new things in labs and see what works and see what doesn't. And then you had small guys who just said, you know what, I'm going to build my reputation on the fact that I do things differently than the way it was done last generation, the generation before, whatever it might be. And that's continued. Throughout the pandemic, we're seeing the mid-market catch up a little bit, which is interesting. But by and large now, when we ask questions around where are you investing, how much are you investing, how much of your team are you dedicating, where's your training, we're now being able to sort of tie those really large, big, powerful retailers to the small little guys who are trying to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. And it's a great opportunity for those who would otherwise have been marginalized to compete now in a way that does put them on a stage where we can have their names mentioned alongside Amazon because they're doing creative and innovative things. And that's fantastic to see.
Yeah, just to pile on a little bit there, Dan. So there was a very important parts that Rob covered. So first of all, it's rich tea, not hobnobs.
Okay, thanks, Bryn.
Just do your voice now. They're better for dunking. And we can have a whole webinar about Dunkin' biscuits. It's really interesting. Again, picking up on that smaller entity. And one of the things, just to kind of pile on to what Steve's talking about, I've been really interested with some of these smaller retail units and how they've been able to drive innovation at pace as part of it. So, I've actually seen them outstrip some of the big box brands as a driver. I mean, you start thinking, well, why? And I mean, one of the biggest things for them is that a lot of these companies were born in the cloud when they start looking at their infrastructure. They don't have this big monolith holding them back. So they were able to be nimble and you be agile and to be agile. And I'm not saying it's the only reason. They've got to have good product, good marketing. But there are some common trends when I start lifting sort of the hood on it a little bit. And a lot of them are born in the cloud. They've lent into a DevOps. They're able to create rapid cycles where they're able to fail fast, test the market, adopt, and innovate. The other piece which I've seen them do as well, which is really interesting, is look at different routes to market. So they start using social media more heavily. They start using applications like Facebook to drive advertising and marketing. So they're looking at more interesting ways to go to market. And again, I genuinely believe they've been able to facilitate that by having a more open architecture that can interact with multiple different digital estates. So they can drive this sort of different sort of shop window, as it were, out there. And again, it's just really intriguing to see them make those step changes.
So if you look at so the way we would describe it, Bryn, if you look at sort of capability velocity, how fast you can go from zero to a new capability, you're absolutely right. Large players often have to overcome legacy investments in technology, legacy ways of working that you've described. We often describe it at clients as sort of a complexity tax that they continue to play, that a lot of the born online or smaller or newer players don't have to pay. So I think, again, your instincts are spot on, and it's sort of borne out in sort of the sheer inertia of legacy ways of working, legacy technology, not in cloud legacy technology, to your point, that makes it much, much harder, and again, provides in some ironic way sort of an asymmetric advantage to a smaller player, which is really quite fascinating. What I would hypothesize, and again, this is just me sort of riffing a little bit, if you jump forward to the next big horizon, and you mentioned Facebook, if you look at the metaverse, or you look to Meta, right? It's going to be interesting if those large retailers can reclaim some of that advantage because of their ability to invest in digital assets within the metaverse, right? So, for example, if I'm Levi Strauss versus a small startup denim company, my ability to buy digital property and establish digital assets in the metaverse is greater than sort of born online brand. So even though that born online brand may be more tech savvy, more cloud native, to your point, the resources to possibly compete in that next generation of digital storefront, as you've described. So it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out. There seems to be, at the moment, it seems the level of investment in meta assets or metaverse assets by the really big brands and really big retailers seems a little juxtaposed against reality at the moment, because not everybody has headsets and not everybody's playing in the metaverse.
And let's hope it stays that way for as long as possible. But yes.
Yeah, exactly. Like with my bald head, I look silly in headsets, Dan. So I fully appreciate that. But yeah, it's going to be fascinating, Bryn. I think you make a good point about speed and agility, favoring small and medium-sized players, especially those that exploit cloud more freely and more naturally. Steve, I don't know what your research bears out.
It's also, I mean, we've had so many conversations as of late, and we've done so much research around service as the differentiator. So all of the things that go into that, including, I mean, this is probably a little bit of an aside, but we were talking a bit about generational stuff a few moments ago. I had a conversation. I am of a certain age, and I was having a conversation with someone who was significantly younger the other day about call center experiences and how frustrating they are. And we were both talking about recent experiences where we were redlining with anger because the call center experience was not what we wanted it to be. And then we both kind of blurted out what we were mad about. And I was really mad that I couldn't get a human being on the phone. And they were really mad that they had a human being on the phone and wanted a chatbot, an intelligent chatbot. And it was at that moment that I realized we're all a little bit different, aren't we? So to have these conversations about what great service looks like requires a redefinition of who the consumer is and all the different ways that we can respond to them in the way that they want that service. You know, Dan might be walking in a store and he just wants to get a Valentine's Day card and get the hell out of there. And I might be wanting to go in and have a real experience and talk to someone about, you know, the organic nature by which these flowers were grown for the exact same holiday. So it's a shame to say that it depends is going to be the answer going forward for a lot of these things. But for smaller retailers in particular, it depends on how much they want to make service part of their differentiator from the bigger, larger, nameless, faceless retailers.
Okay, so I think from here, first I'll say, Steve, you know my shopping habits too well, and Rob, yeah, I definitely sympathize with the whole the bald head headset issues. But I think here now we've gotten some really good ideas flowing about retail tech transformation. Let's ask our second audience poll question. So let's get some more feedback. Which enhancement would most improve your retail customers' experience today? Buying options, either online or in store, product interaction or catalog view, promotions and personalization, and data security, and brand trust. And also, while we're waiting for results to come in, I'll just remind the audience that if you have any questions you'd like to ask about anything any of our experts have discussed so far, or something they haven't discussed that is relevant, that you're interested in hearing their thoughts on, please send those questions along. Now would be that time, and I think we're starting to get some results in. We're going to wait another moment or two just to make sure that everybody has a chance to answer before we do a brief review of the results. I think this certainly should give us some interesting insight into where the industry is in terms of retail tech transformation. Okay, so we're looking at, let's see, in terms of which enhancement. Okay, so for buying options online or in store, it looks like 11% gave that answer. It looks like 11% also said that product interaction or catalog view would most improve their customer experience. Almost 56% said promotions and personalization, and another 22% said data security and brand trust.
So promotions is the name of the game for our audience.
Sounds like it. I guess that that shouldn't be too surprising. Okay, so now that we've gone through the poll, let's get back to our discussion. So, Steve, let me ask you for a moment about retail challenges. Can you tell us what you're seeing in the industry when it comes to hurdles or barriers to retailers that are moving toward edge-enabled experiences that customers expect?
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways of categorizing those, right? There's the external challenges that everybody faces. And, we all weighed in on that not too long ago. There is no shortage of challenges staring us all in the face right now. It's a hard time to be a retailer. It really is. And we try to, keep that in mind every time we're being prescriptive, every time we're writing one of our reports, every time that we're offering recommendations, every time that we're sitting and advising either retailers themselves or the people that sell into retail. It's really important to recognize this is not easy. The industry has changed on its own fairly organically, but when you compound I saw a presentation, gosh, it was probably a month ago now, at a user conference of a retired 2-star Army general who laid out all the things that have hit us in the industry in the last 2 years. A disputed election, an insurgency in Washington, D.C., a pandemic, inflation. These things have all happened before historically, usually 100 or so years ago. When they did, they took a long time for the economy to recover, for the society to recover. All these things have happened in the last 2 years. We are being hit with an unprecedented amount of change, and it's coming at retailers from all sides, not to mention the fact that Amazon just keeps getting smarter and better and more powerful. Who cares if they make any money? They're just going to keep reinvesting and making sure that they put other retailers out of business. So the external challenges are pretty well documented. I think what's probably far more interesting for the purposes of our research is helping retailers navigate the internal challenges. because the amount of flexibility required for years, supply chains were built to be as last minute as possible. Let's get the product to the customer's hands at the last possible minute, just at the right time. That doesn't work anymore. When we're sourcing products from half a world away and all these other external challenges are existing, we need flexibility built into our organizations in order to be able to handle that. And an awful lot of times that comes down to personnel and the way interdepartmentally enterprises are set up to facilitate communication between people that 2 or 3 years ago would have been more than happy to either pass each other in the halls or pass each other in the virtual halls and not have conversations and not have really difficult sort of pride-swallowing conversations about how do we solve for the consumer rather than how do I make sure that I look great at my job. And those are harder conversations to have because now you're getting into touchy-feely stuff, right? And this is not a touchy-feely industry, right? This is not the kind of, apart from a few vendors who have meditation stations at their user conferences, this is not a particularly well-discussed part of what it's like to be in business in the modern era. But it is. It is a vital component, making sure that you are set up internally to have people that have historically grown to sort of, I don't want to say loathe each other, but certainly not respect each other. To change that part of culture is very important. And we spend a lot of time writing about that. And, it's an uphill battle, but it's a battle that needs to be fought.
Okay, great. So, Bryn, I don't know, maybe if you want to start off and give your thoughts on retail challenges and what Steve said.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you talk about culture as part of it. So again, one of the things that I see, I'm in these meetings and you see these different teams come together and I'm like, oh, who are you? And we're introducing each other. And it's like, right, hang on, don't you guys work for the same company? And you have that awkward fight about that meeting. So, so I see it all the time. It's a classic narrative. IT with a bunch of guys and girls that were kept in the closet and used to slip a pizza under the door, and it's a cost center. Rob, you talked about digital transformation, the acceleration, 10 years worth of effort, arguably in a month or 2 months. Yeah. So IT's been pulled out of that cupboard, right? They need to become part of that experience. You talk about how supply chain are now becoming part of the day-to-day operations. It's no longer seen as this necessary evil. It's integral to success. So I think there's definitely a massive culture shift. And if I went to a retailer 3 years ago and talked about DevOps, I'd get this blank look on their face. What? Whereas now, okay, yeah, get it. I can integrate this to my pipeline. I can start running rapid innovation. So definitely seeing that correlation between direct success from a revenue and profitability to the adoption of emergent technology. So absolutely see that. It's interesting in that poll, something that really struck me was about data security. So there's a couple of things. If I look forward about some on the horizon, some of the challenges that I would put money on that are going to be coming forward to us. So one is data privacy and data challenges. So we've accelerated at pace. We've rolled out technology. We've bootstrapped stuff so we can continue to do business over the last 2 years. There's also another trend that we haven't talked about that's happening alongside of us. Is about us as individuals becoming more aware of our own digital footprint. There was a data set I saw out from an analyst. Unfortunately, it wasn't anybody on this call. Sorry, guys, do read other stuff as well. A couple of months ago, that basically said that, and I'm paraphrasing massively here, so please bear with me. It's basically said 3/4 of consumers will not trust an enterprise post a security event.
Yes.
So that was the first data point.
Completely believe that.
Yeah, and so you start thinking about the impact of that. So if you're pivoting, if you're doing a hard left into this digital estate, but you drop a ball, you could argue that you'd lose 75% of your market share. And I mean, that's an extreme scenario, guys. So
For a time, right?
For a time. Now, that's the next bit. I think it was 50% would never go back. So you have that window of impact. And like I said, guys, this is just one poll, one study, okay? So it's not definitive. But what it's talking to is that we need to make sure as we're moving forward, and one of the headwinds I see in going to that horizon is security by design, is making sure we're thinking respectfully about consumer data. And Rob talked about the metaverse and Web.3. That's a really good example about data. So I spend a lot of time, I can talk about this one with a company called, the foundation called Solana. So one of the things they're looking at is about how blockchain can become part of Web.3. How do you secure individual data? How do you take control of your own consumer information? So that's a piece. I think the other piece, I think we mentioned edge at the beginning of this, is, and again, I'm already seeing this trend. It's a little bit of a hangover from that bootstrapping. And what I mean by that is a lot of businesses and retailers have rapidly deployed technology because they've had to, and is absolutely the right thing to do. No criticism whatsoever. They've rapidly deployed technology. Now they've accidentally ended up with mini data centers in all of our locations.
Right.
So they're like, oh, how did that happen? Number one.
Right.
Number two, are they optimal? Are they cost efficient in the long term? And have they created another anchor that's going to stop them from innovating moving forward? Right. So it's one of these things. You don't want to end up in a situation by technical debt right now. So in the longer term, so one of the things when I'm sitting down with the customer saying, okay, great, fully understand why you've made this decision, absolutely the correct decision. How do we start cascading that in a controlled manner now to make sure that you continue to remain agile? Because there's no point just sprinting for 30 seconds going, I'm done.
Right.
You want to drive that innovation. So that's what I say. And guys, would you agree, disagree? Pick on
maybe Rob, if you'd like to respond to that, and then we'll get into kind of our final thoughts. And also, audience, you still have time to ask questions if you'd like.
Yeah, so I do agree, Bryn. It's funny. I serve a consumer goods company that, as part of this sort of arms race to direct to consumer during COVID, different brand managers across the enterprise ended up standing up more than 24 different disparate Shopify entities. And so they did it, as you mentioned, well-intentioned, go fast, it's easy. Some of them actually stood them up using sort of their corporate credit card, signing up online and building their own direct-to-consumer site. And basically, they were just asking IT to punch a hole in the firewall so I can share data, with Shopify. And it really was like 26 or 29 Shopify instances before the CIO said, wait a second, like what's happening here right now, right? And so I think your notion of, sort of a prolific, ungoverned expansion is also a bad outcome here, right? So a really thoughtful way to invest. The one thing that I hope is if you look back to the 2008, 2009 financial crisis, and you look at companies that had a bold strategy versus a retrenching strategy, there is a massive difference in performance to total shareholder return for companies that were bold coming out of 2008 and 2009. So the biggest challenge that I see as retailers in the face of inflation, in the face of a potential recession, retrenching and slowing that investment in technology, I think the long run, they're going to be proven to be the losers here. Because I promise you that Amazon's not going to slow down. I promise you that the big players who have moved to the models that you've described, to cloud, to DevOps, to other sort of more modern operating models, they're going to keep investing. And if you don't, I think that's a losing proposition. So for me, that's the biggest challenge, Dan.
Okay, I don't mean to cut people off, but we're very close to the end. We'll hopefully get at least one audience question. If maybe you can each, just in 30 seconds, just quickly summarize any final recommendation you'd have for audience members who want to elevate their customer experience.
I'm just going to go technical debt, guys. Don't, like I said, big risk right now is creating more technical debt that won't allow you to be agile moving forward. You need to be agile to drive an enhanced customer experience. For me, it's that simple.
Okay. Steve?
I mean, one takeaway, this is not the time to be timid, but it's also the time to be really smart, right? This is an investment today in ensuring that your consumer is going to be happier than they would be shopping with someone else is a investment worth looking at.
Okay. Rob?
Yeah, so mine's a little more conceptual. That I would say double down on cloud, right? So I think most companies don't realize what an unlock that is when that is done at scale, and so I would say double down on cloud.
Okay, and we have time to just each give just a brief response to this audience question. Would be, do you have any predictions for retail's future, given what looks like we're going to have continuing inflation in the U.S. at least for for some time?
Prediction?
If anyone has a thought, that's fine.
Silver Lang's prediction? Pain? No, I mean, there will be a culling, right? We are seeing a thinning of the herd. One of my business partners, Paula Rosenblum, who many of you probably know because she's been around forever and she's not particularly shy, has been said that it's overdue anyhow. I would look at it slightly differently in saying, rather that there's going to be a thinning of the herd due to the fact that dollars don't go as far as they used to, is that consumers are going to continue to vote with their wallets in ways that best serve them and their families. And as a result, we might see some really new, innovative retailers who offer kind of similar goods, but present them in ways that make life easier for people. We'll see them flourish.
Okay, anyone else?
Just to pile on to what Steve's saying, yes, there will be. I've heard people talk about, it's similar to your comment about a resetting of a market to a point that, you can argue many different ways around that. I think fundamentally it's going to put a greater focus on service and service experience. If I've got $1 to spend, I want to get the maximum from that dollar.
Yeah.
And I think that will continue to be the focus. Again, going back to Steve's point about now's the time to invest in that customer journey and that experience.
Okay, Bryn, any thoughts?
Well, you can speak for me, Bryn. I think you mean
that's all right.
No, so I one thing that's encouraging. I certainly understand inflation. I think there's more to come. I'm not yet fully convinced that a prolonged recession is inevitable. And the one data point that I would have in talking to some of my other senior partners this morning on the topic, I don't have a single customer, retailer, consumer coming to me about cutting yet. Normally, if you have a CEO that's sort of reacting to pre-recessionary forces, we start to get requests to help come in and sort of take more of a cost focus. And all of the clients that we're continuing to serve are still growth minded, at least when it comes to technology, right? And I think it's a testament to the strength of the American consumer and the global consumer. So yeah, there's headwinds, but I remain hopeful.
Okay, very good. In that case, we've had a great conversation. We are at the end of the hour. Once again, I'd like to thank Bryn Norton of Lumen, Rob Kane of McKinsey, and Steve Rowan of RSR Research. And of course, we'd like to thank Lumen for sponsoring today's event. And finally, I would like to thank all of you, our attendees, for devoting some of your very valuable time to be with us today as well. So we hope you found this worthwhile. And I think that covers everything. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great day. We hope to have you back here again soon.